Get it done. We're doing it now. Come on. Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, reading rainbow. Reading is magical, isn't it? If I had my way, every textbook in every classroom in America would be thrown into the trash where they belong. They're nonsense, filled with names, dates, facts. It sickens me. Facts are for cowards. I don't want to know what happened. I want to argue about what happened. Longtime viewers have watched as I have developed a fascination with primary sources. The eyewitness accounts of long-dead men and all the biases that they come with. Behind most boring battles in a textbook is some guy writing about how a cannon made a dude's head fly clean off his fucking body, and how he definitely deserved it. I argue that we should replace all textbooks in America with the mad ramblings of dead men. Primary sources make history come alive in your mind in a way that a textbook just sort of can't. A textbook is, at least nominally, authoritative, dense, factual. A primary source is flawed, deeply biased, and very human. Consider the following passage from a conquistador present during the fall of the Aztec Empire who I've discussed at length, Bernal Diaz. This is a passage from his true history of the conquest of New Spain. Even when I go to the villages of my encomienda, I do not take a bed. Or if I sometimes do, it is not because I want it, but because some gentlemen are traveling with me, and I do not wish them to think that I do not possess a good bed. But I always lie down fully dressed. What is more, I can only sleep for a short time at night. I have to get up and look at the sky and stars and walk about for a bit in the dew. And this without putting a cap on my head. I'm so used to it that, thank God, it does me no harm. I've said all this so that my readers shall know how we, the true conquistadors, lived, and how accustomed we became to our arms and to keeping watch. From this passage, we get more than we ever could from a textbook. We get the person behind those moments in history. We see Bernal Diaz's pride. He's very proud, self-conscious even, of appearing poor. He's also so proud that he feels the need to communicate how fraught with danger and peril the conquest of Mexico was. And most interestingly to me, he's saying that now that it's over, he doesn't sleep well anymore. I feel like a lot of people tend to underestimate just how far back we're going when I talk about Spanish colonization. As much time has passed between the signing of the Declaration of Independence and now as time passed between Cabeza de Vaca being stranded on a Texas beach and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. What was fascinating for me, as a Texas native, was seeing my home through the eyes of a stranger 500 years ago, and how I couldn't really recognize it anymore. For nearly a decade, Cabeza and the other survivors of the Narvaez expedition would travel naked through places no European had ever seen before, places on the eve of profound environmental and demographic destruction. Cabeza de Vaca would become a forager, a trader, a medicine man, and miracle worker. And at the end of this nearly decade-long odyssey, when the 4 survivors of the Narvaez expedition made contact with a particularly infamous and brutal Spanish governor, the governor gave them some clothing to wear. But Cabeza de Vaca had changed. I could not stand to wear any clothes for some time, or to sleep anywhere but on the bare floor. The textbooks will give you the names of all the dead men, but they never tell you how they slept. And who can blame Bernal Diaz for his sleepless nights? He fought bloody, screaming Aztec warriors. They were a people so inhuman and brutal that they found entertainment watching men fight to the death, or being eaten alive by animals. They would bury men and women alive, or strangle them to death in their sick displays of mass human sacrifice. They even had a holiday where they crucified dogs. Longtime DJ Peach Cobbler subscribers now know the game I'm playing. Subscribe for your own personal FBI agent. The Aztec didn't do that shit. I just described Rome before Christianity. They did awful shit after Christianity too, it was just less interesting. I'm gonna keep it real with you. If one of you Byzantine bitches decides to write a comment disagreeing with that statement, know that I have a crucifix with your dog's name on it. Regardless, to paraphrase Tom Holland, no, not that one. The Romans had a genius for making a show out of death. I'm not saying the Romans were simple-minded, barbarous monsters. I'm saying humans are barbarous monsters, and we are not simple. What I'm saying is that I've yet to find any civilization in human history who doesn't look like this, when you ignore their basic humanity, when you just list out all the shit that we find unpalatable in this supposedly enlightened and certainly self-righteous age. It's very easy. It's horribly unimpressive. It's basically meaningless. Hence why it is the only way that we have internet arguments. Oh, your country doesn't deserve to be turned into an endless sheet of slightly radioactive glass? But have you considered this mean Wikipedia article? Checkmate. When I read the words of Caesar, or Plutarch, or Tacitus, or Cicero, they make me realize that the Romans may have been inhumane, but they were unmistakably human. Cicero's writings, his letters to his friend Atticus in particular, truly humanize a man that lived and died before the birth of Christ. To quote Cicero by Anthony Everett, in Cicero's correspondence, noble Romans are flesh and blood, not marble. What would we think of Rome if someone burned their books and letters, and as they burned them, they wrote the history of Rome from their enemy's perspective? And their enemies would tell stories that would make your skin crawl. Stories of a nation which trampled rich and ancient kingdoms into dust before stripping them for gold and silver. The story of Rome would not be the story of men. It would be the story of monsters. The Romans may have had a holiday where they crucified dogs, but that does not change the fact that they would, at times, leave little tombstones for their dogs. And on one of those tombstones is written, "I am in tears while carrying you to your last resting place, as much as I rejoiced when bringing you home in my own hands 15 years ago." Writing has independently emerged 4 times in human history. And one of those places is Mexico. Now, this is a little open to interpretation. It can be surprisingly difficult to distinguish between what is and is not writing. Undeciphered things, which may or may not be writing, and it's sort of hard to tell. I want Rongo Rongo to be real more than I want to no longer have a micro penis. But we don't always get what we want, do we? If anyone on Earth had a story to tell that I want to fucking hear, they lived on the island at the end of the Earth. On the east coast of Mexico, a people that we now call the Olmec created a script which would probably, sort of difficult to tell, later evolve into the Maya system of writing. Also, the Olmec were black. That's why Mexicans get to say it. I know this will not shock you, but I consider writing to be our greatest achievement. The wheel? Gay. We have been touched by the hand of God. The fires of Prometheus, or random chance if you want to be a fucking Redditor about it, with the visions, words, and deeds of the dead. These visions are haunting. They're beautiful. They are tragic, and they don't come from a textbook. Textbooks teach you how to pass tests. There are no tests at DJ Peach Cobbler University. All grades are determined by bikini contest. And I always win. The Maya would inherit and expand upon the writing system developed by the Olmec. For nearly 2,000 years they wrote. Most importantly to me, they did write histories, albeit in a very different form to the Western historical tradition. This pre-Columbian writing is preserved on their innumerable stelae, ceramics, monuments, and 4 books. What I just called books should instead be called codices, or in the singular, codex. The codices which survive largely deal with spiritual, ritual, and astrological matters, which is hardly the sort of thing that I like from history. But it's for It's not a good sample size. What the fuck else did they write that we don't have anymore? The fact remains that what survives of a literate people who wrote for over 1,500 years is 4 books, a bunch of cups and jars, which generally just denote the name of the owner and the function of the piece itself, and a shitload of propaganda. Propaganda is very informative, of course, and frankly a lot of history is just propaganda. But that being said, it's humanity which fascinates me. And the divine kings who ruled Maya polities in the classical period literally claimed to be descended from gods. They were not trying to write about their humanity. Their authority was derived from their inhumanity. Their relationship to the divine, their ability to crush their rivals and create glory for themselves and their ancestors. A common inscription on classical Mayan war memorials was, "The blood pooled, the heads piled up." Politicians, am I right? The state, in all of its terrible power, is what has first and foremost, although not exclusively, survived of the pre-Columbian Maya. This makes them alien, remote, unimaginable, and cruel. Because when you strip the underlying humanity from a state, that is all that's left. Domination. And that's always the problem with the mean Wikipedia articles. These monuments, Maya stelae and architecture, tell us a great deal about the rituals such rulers conducted to commune with their divinized ancestors, but precious little about what ordinary life was like for their subjects, let alone how those subjects felt about their rulers' claims to cosmic power. 4 Mayan books exist today, and on July 12, 1562, in the Mayan city of Mani, Diego de Landa burned 27 in one day. 40, according to some sources. With one single bonfire, centuries of Maya culture and religion perished forever. The destruction of Maya codices and artifacts was not the exclusive domain of Diego de Landa. It was a centuries-long project, which was ruthlessly effective. You know, I started this whole thing because I just wanted to learn more about the Maya, right? Like hot chocolate and basketball and chucking kids into lakes and pyramids. Like they were interesting guys. Did you know they had a goddess of suicide? Well, probably not, actually. You see, Diego de Landa said they had a goddess of suicide because he didn't just destroy their history, he also wrote their history in his famous Relaccion de las cosas de Yucatan. To quote William Gates, if 99% of our present knowledge is derived from what Diego de Landa told us, it is an equally safe statement that he burned 99 times as much knowledge of Maya history and sciences as he has given us in his book. Now, to be clear, that Gates quote was written at a time before the Mayan script had been deciphered. But the fact remains that without Diego de Landa's writings, it's very possible that it never would have been deciphered. We cannot read the books he burned, which probably number in the hundreds, if not thousands, collectively. For well over a century now, those who study the Maya have worked and worked and worked to crawl out from under the shadow of this one man, a man they fucking hate. I want to, through the power of writing, which Diego de Landa strived to deny the Maya, try to understand him and why he did it. In this video, I want to answer a simple question, which has haunted me for months. How did Diego de Landa sleep at night? In this video, we are going to discuss the myriad motivations behind Diego de Landa's brutal inquisition against the Maya in the summer of 1562. Now, I've divided these motivations into 6 main categories, and they are as follows. Oh shit, brown people. A crazy theory about the Jews. The end is nigh. Who's in charge here? I forgot to fucking record this. Look at that. Look at that fucking idiot. Idiot!
Daddy is angry.
And finally, Jungle Madness. Frankly, I wanted to stop the video here. As longtime viewers know, I am gay and I am racist. So, I got shit to do. I gotta go measure my boyfriend's skull, but I've been told that these 6 categories require explanation. Jungle Madness seems very self-explanatory to me. Very common for a man his age, but I digress. In an ad, you're supposed to be positive, but I'm going to keep it real here. It's August, the objectively worst month. It's 8 million degrees outside, and while I haven't been to school in years, partially for legal reasons, the Pavlovian conditioning is something I just can't shake off. But this August, things are different. That's right, because you are going to buy Raycon Everyday Earbuds. You do not have a choice. I've contacted my handlers at the CIA, and they are currently hacking your computer and forcing it to go to buyraycon.com/Peach Cobbler. Also, they're gonna delete Genshin Impact off your computer while they're digging around in there. You are welcome. Those glowies are doing you a favor, because at buyraycon.com/Peach Cobbler, you will get 20 to 40% off your first order, plus free shipping. Also, they're comfortable. They're sweat resistant, and because I use the active noise canceling to avoid hearing my wife and her boyfriend in the other room, I know for a fact that they're tear resistant too. These low-profile earbuds are great for listening to your favorite podcasts and whatever horrible anime soundtrack it is that you kids these days listen to. I know what you're doing, and God does too. Alright, sincerity time. These things sound really good, and they actually don't fly out my ears the second I wiggle my head around. And the bass sounds great when I listen to the hottest song which came out this summer, which was inexplicably about Drake being I've been advised to continue that sentence no further. If the CIA has failed in their mission because they ran out the budget putting microphones in dogs, then I must ask you to avoid resisting. Go to buyraycon.com/Peach Cobbler and ascend to Audio Nirvana with a sweet, sweet discount which will support the channel. Thank you, Raycon, for sponsoring this video. At this point in the video, originally, I was going to give you a little crash course in Mayan history. I even went so far as to have a shirt made depicting elements of the Popol Vuh, which was the Quiche Maya creation myth. Don't worry, I'm still a whore and it is therefore still for sale, but this video is about the mind of Diego de Landa. How writing can be used to humanize and dehumanize people. These are heavy, complex themes, and it just brought everything to a screeching fucking halt. I'm refilming all of this. So I read 2 books exclusively about the Maya, and neither will be useful here. I do recommend them. The Maya, a very short introduction. Most people would enjoy it, I think. And for those of you who want a deeper perspective, the Maya 10th edition by Michael Coe and Stephen Houston is also really great work. But despite the fact that we can't really give the Maya the time they really deserve in this video specifically, we should provide a little bit of background here. At least enough so that you understand the situation on the ground when Diego de Landa actually arrived to the Yucatan. So, yeah, you gotta eat your vegetables before you can have your crazy Jew theory for dessert. The Maya are not an ethnic group, they are not an empire, they are not a culture. Maybe they are a language. But no, they, gotta bring out the spare chalk, they're not a language. The Maya, as they are so called, are a lie. A very useful lie for educational purposes. The classic Maya are a fiction from which deeper realities emerge. In all probability, indigenous groups of the Yucatan Peninsula and adjacent zones never perceived themselves as a single people during the first millennium. Yet still, they can be treated as such for a very simple reason. The classic Maya lived in ways more alike than unlike. There are between 6 and 7 million Maya alive today, most of them dwelling within their historical territory, which stretches from the tip of the Yucatan down to the Pacific coast of Guatemala. For this video, we will be focusing on the lowland Maya, who lived on the Yucatan Peninsula, as they were the ones subjected to de Landa's Inquisition. The history of the Maya is generally divided into 3 different periods. Pre-classic, classic, post-classic. Pre-classic began when the aliens showed up, I believe. I don't know. I didn't actually read those books I described to you. This division of time, of course, implies a rise, peak, and fall. I've been exposed to a lot of different perspectives on the fall of the classical Maya. Matthew Ristall and Amari Solari argue that the fall didn't really occur. What we are seeing is a decline in the southern lowlands in terms of population and complexity, whereas other parts of the Maya world rose in complexity and population. The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity, argues that the collapse of the Maya was more so a revolution, a rejection of the old cult of the Aja, or divine kings of the Maya. I strongly encourage you to reach your own conclusions and to look into it for yourself. I desire not only to scare the hose, but to inspire you, viewer, to scare the hose yourself. I have seen my analytics. Also, in general, I just have a much more difficult time figuring out when archaeologists and anthropologists are blowing smoke up my ass. With the study of the Maya, you were forced to listen to those sick freaks who go outside. With historians, it's easy to figure out when they're talking out their asses. All you gotta do is look for the phrase, "It has been said." It has been said that the Maya constructed grand city centers and wonderful architecture and artwork before they mysteriously disappeared prior to the arrival of Europeans. They didn't. They're still there. Regardless, by the time of Spanish contact, the Maya were not a particularly wealthy or populous people, at least when contrasted to the Aztec or the Inca. But these ancient stone monuments were, of course, there. The Spaniards, as you could imagine, were very enthused by these monuments and what they implied about the history of this fascinating place. Diego de Landa himself wrote about these monuments. If the Yucatan could earn a name and reputation due to the great number and beauty of its buildings, like other parts of the Indies have achieved with gold, silver, and riches, it would be known about as much as Peru and New Spain. This is because its buildings, and the large number of them, are one of the most remarkable things that have been discovered up until today in the Indies. They are astonishing. During time of Spanish contact, the Maya mostly lived in towns called Ka, or in the plural, Cahob. So, when the Spaniards arrived in the Yucatan and they saw these grand ruins, this kept happening.
My God, who could have constructed such fine and impressive city centers? Who could have carved such beautiful artwork and buildings from the jungle? Oh, we did this. Did the Romans do it? But if so, where do these strange symbols come from?
Us. I can read those to you. You can. Oh, someone's gonna have to do something about that.
Great Scott! Who could have built these wondrous cities?
Holy shit, we did. Can you read these symbols then? No. Must have been aliens then. The following 6 parts of this video will be an exploration of the theological, political, and social motivations behind Diego de Landa's brutal Inquisition before finally recounting, of course, the events that occurred on that infamous summer. So let's pull the first thread of this tapestry of madness. This section will be devoted to the paranoia behind the spiritual conquest of the New World and the reason why Spanish Catholicism has such a zealous and brutal reputation. But first, what the fuck's a friar? You may be asking this question if you're anything like me. The church to American Protestants was basically just that place where those huge guys ripped phone books in half sometimes. Like, I wouldn't really call myself Christian, but this is a persuasive argument. At the lower levels of the Catholic Church at this time, you had monks, friars, and secular clergy. Now, this one fucked me up the first time I read it. But to be a member of the secular clergy was to be just, a priest. A professional Jesus boy who lives in a town and performs religious services from a church. Now, you can also be a priest and a monk, or a priest and a friar, which is why we need to separate the secular clergy from, the bad haircut club. Monks, by contrast, lived secluded lives of study, devotion, and bad haircuts away from the general population. And friars, they occupied that dirty centrist grilling space. They took vows of poverty and chastity like monks, but they would perform services for the public, usually traveling town to town, preaching, baptizing, so on. The Franciscan order of friars was founded by Saint Francis of Assisi, a real broke bitch who advocated for a life of poverty in imitation of Christ himself, as opposed to the then increasingly decadent Catholic Church. He even went so far as to symbolically marry the Lady of Poverty. It was the friars of the Franciscan order who led the Spanish spiritual conquest of the New World. The power team was unavailable. Well, for most of my audience and myself who think that, naturally the house house of God should look like the place the Houston Rockets used to play, the Catholic Church, rather, may conjure images of big, beautiful buildings filled with decadent kitty diddlers. This was not the world friars or monks would have lived in. A Franciscan friar took vows of poverty and chastity, as opposed to me, who's broken holus for the love of the game. Even having advanced degrees in theology would be regarded as ostentatious. Even the private ownership of books was a little gauche, don't you think? What, you own your own books? What are you, a fucking rapper? To be clear, education and reading were central parts of these men's lives, but knowledge was a means to an end, and that end was not collecting a bunch of fancy-ass degrees and books. I presented Hernan Cortez's Jesus shit as a con, a rhetorical tool he used to justify his actions, and I do stand by that being the case. You can't be a man of God and have that many concubines, I think. We gotta have a cutoff, like 3 or 4 maybe. The life of a friar would be spent traveling from village to village, barefoot, performing religious services and rituals, doing charitable acts, and studying religion without expecting even a degree, much less any sort of real material reward. Now, when I talk about the corruption and decadence of the Catholic Church, I'm not just squirting Protestant rope down the back of your throat, you feel me? Hernan Cortez cited that decadence as a reason for why friars should lead the conversion of the native peoples in the New World, in his 4th letter to the king. If we have bishops and other prelates, they will follow the customs of disposing of the gifts of the church and wasting them in pomp and other vices, leaving family estates for their relatives and their children. If they, the Indians, now saw the servants of God's church practicing vanities and learning that they were the ministers of God and beheld them falling into vice, as is the case in our times in Spain, it would bring our faith into contempt, and the natives would hold it as mockery. Now, the reason Hernan Cortez wanted all those Jesus boys to come over was very simple. People had begun to ask questions about what was going on at the other end of the world. The question in particular being asked was, did they deserve it? This was a big question in Spain and other European kingdoms at the time. Did Native Americans deserve to be subjugated by Spain? If they were just being exploited for their labor and precious metals, then, well, they certainly didn't. There needed to be an ideological underpinning to the conquest of the New World. We're past Rome, where making a desert and calling it peace was just sort of acceptable. You had to at least pay lip service to the hippie on a stick. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted anymore. And during this time, we are seeing the emergence of the philosophical underpinnings of what we now call human rights. It was very inconvenient. I see this question still discussed today, usually via memes, which is how discourse is conducted. Now, gentlemen, I have to ask you to be measured and objective here. We are discussing history. No one deserves that shit. Regardless, for De Landa, who greatly criticized the brutality of conquistadors during the conquest of the Yucatan, this was still not really a question worth asking. These people had been suffering at the ends of the earth in a dark jungle in Spain, and Jesus had saved them. God has chosen Spain, among other nations, as the remedy of so many peoples, for which they owe her much more than they do their own founders or progenitors. For as indeed the blessed Saint Gregory says, it would not do us much good to be born, unless we were to be redeemed by Christ's blessing. De Landa devotes several paragraphs to the myriad spiritual and material benefits of Spanish government. It's like a terrible, terrible meme just walked right off the fucking page and into my goddamn face. It's basically just this disgusting anime meme. You see, Montezuma failed to consider the rhetorical power of the anime girl. De Landa glazes Spain to such an extent, he even mentions that the Maya took a great liking to cats. The Indians have not lost, but instead have gained a lot with the coming of the Spanish nation. The cats are very beneficial and necessary there, and the Indians love them a lot. This is Sia. I named her after the CIA. Say hi, Sia. Sia, look into the Sia! Sia, I want Patreon money. Come on. If you give me money on Patreon, I won't put her down. Hold on, I'm gonna get one more cat. This is Spot. Look into the camera, Spot. He's blind. Oh, he's a good boy. Bubby. He's a lot quieter. Oh, big boy. Big boy. Holy shit, a black shirt was a... I'm a genius. Where the fuck was I? Oh, horror. Yes, horror. All right. Let's actually get down to it. Spanish Catholicism was intense for a fucking reason. Time and time again, circumstance would show them that zealotry was their moral imperative and key to the survival of Spain itself. Even continental Spain was a new kingdom, a diverse patchwork of ethnicities and languages which needed an ideological glue, and the Pope shot the horse needed to make that glue as he called Isabella and that prequel to Charles the Chin Wonder athletes of Christ and the Catholic kings. It was a nation literally born by a united Christian kingdom expelling the last Muslim kingdom from the peninsula, and the very same year that happened, this weird Italian guy found a bunch of islands in India, filled with a bunch more ethnicities, and then more, and then more, and then more, and not one of them knew a single goddamn thing about all this Jesus business. You had thousands of years of recorded history in the old world. Then all of a sudden you just find 2 fucking continents of people, and then around 30 years after Columbus's discovery, as Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba led the Spanish in their first ever battle against the Maya, this fucking German nailed some shit to a door. And everyone got a little intense about it. As the Americas were plundered, we should not forget where that plunder went. To finance Charles V's wars in Europe. Wars that would eventually be defined by the growing Protestant movements in Central Europe, which Charles also owned. You don't get a chin like that without inheriting a whole shitload of cool stuff. Okay. Play the clip. Let's focus on the Holy Inquisitions which occurred within the borders of Spain itself, while keeping in mind that there were other inquisitional tribunals in other European kingdoms. Spain did not invent this shit. They invented other things, like afternoon naps and Mexicans. But Spain was unique in one particular way. You see, there's a problem that occurs when you conquer a Muslim territory. Once you're done doing that, well, then you got all these fucking Muslims around. Who could have seen it coming? There was a big campaign to get all the remaining Jews and Muslims in Spain to convert, or else. And once they did convert, did they really convert? Did they really convert hard enough? I bet they're still eating babies in their sneaky Jewish caves. This massive whirlwind of paranoia was compounded by the fact that the best way to prove your innocence in the eyes of an inquisition was to throw other people under the bus and name names. As such, Holy Inquisitions had a habit of spreading.
Hey, so you know how this is a place where Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people could all coexist for years, oftentimes shockingly peacefully, but obviously not always because Reconquista? Yeah, you know, as a Jew, it's been really nice. I agree, it was terrible, and now it's done. Now, you gotta become Christian or be exiled forever. It's not personal, we just can't have you eating babies in caves anymore. Okay, well, that was nice while it lasted, I guess. Sure, I'll worship your guy. Yeah, but are you, really worshiping him? This conversion by force is beginning to feel insincere. Well, no, you threatened to steal my shit and make me leave my home. It's not sincere, I just want you to leave me alone. Oh, okay. So now I'm gonna torture you to death, because since you let me baptize you as Christian, I can now call you a heretic, which is, quite literally, the only thing on the face of the earth that I hate more than Jews. Here's a list of people that I don't like. Wow, selling out your own people. I knew you couldn't be trusted. Yep, that's me, the untrustworthy guy in this interaction.
These forced converts could, but not always of course, find themselves to be subjected to inquisitions and tried as heretics. Heresy, it should be noted, was the willful and knowledgeable disregarding of Catholic canon by a Catholic person. Ignorance was forgivable, and non-Catholics were under no obligation to listen to the funny hat man and all that shit he said. They were obligated to leave. There was a paranoia to Spanish Catholicism, a paranoia centered around specifically false conversions. Even after converting from Judaism, these families would still be othered with the label of converso, and Muslims with the label of morisco. This paranoia was exported to the New World. This is a key quality to what motivated Diego de Landa to conduct his Inquisition. The diversity of religion on the Iberian Peninsula, how that diversity was crushed by Spain's emerging national identity, which was sort of necessary to keep the whole thing together. And there is the inevitable paranoia that making people like Jesus under threat of exile results in. But there was another religious dimension to Diego de Landa's Inquisition, and it's the one you've all been waiting for. Longtime viewers probably remember me mentioning something particularly wacky from the account of Conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo. Upon seeing some altars on what is now called the Island of Sacrifice, Diaz wrote, "Others went so far as to affirm that they, the natives who worshipped and or carved the statues, were descendants of the Jews, whom Titus and Vespasian had driven from Jerusalem, who had been shipwrecked off this coast." During my Fall of the Aztec video, I just mentioned this wacky shit, said it was funny, and moved on. But Diaz was right. Of course he was right. He said something in a book. I mean, that means it happened. Buy this shirt too? Fuck you. Native Americans, in particular the natives of Mesoamerica, including the Maya, are descended from ancient Jews, who escaped the fall of Jerusalem at the end of the Second Jewish War in 70 AD. As someone that made a video on specifically that war and its consequences, well, this sort of makes sense. It actually clarifies a lot of things that confused me in Flavius Josephus's account. Titus cast down the second temple and forbade the construction of a third. Upon hearing this, the weird tribe from down the block with the cool tattoos and piercings said, "Fuck this. I'm gonna go build a new civilization with hot chocolate and basketball, and I'm going to make the aliens help." And so, they got on a boat and fucked right off for a while. Anyway, let's get back to Titus, whose father financed this book. He had the largest penis I have ever seen. Too much tip, though. This was only one school of thought. There were others who believed the Maya to be descended from Phoenicians, or even more ancient Jews, from the 10 lost tribes of Israel in Old Testament times. Those 10 lost tribes have caused more crazy conspiracy theories than anything else on the face of the fucking earth. Has anyone just put up a missing poster? For this reason, Mormons love the Maya, as those 10 lost tribes are a big part of their whole Bible fan fiction, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Mormons visit Maya sites all the time. They actually harshed my buzz recently when I visited Chichen Itza. I was trying to smoke salvia and commune with the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. Bunch of fucking nerds. Stop, put your pants on. Where'd the spear come from? I'm doing science! I wanted to see why Kukulkan liked dick blood so much. I get it now. So what did Diego de Landa have to say on this peculiar belief in his historical account of the Yucatan? Some old men of Yucatan say that they have heard from their forebears that the country was populated by a certain people who came from the east, whom God delivered by opening for them 12 roads through the sea, which, if true, means all the inhabitants of the Indies would necessarily have come from the Jews, because once past the Straits of Magellan, they had to spread over more than 2,000 leagues of territory now governed by Spain. So the Mexicans are the real Jews. Who's gonna tell Kanye? I don't want to be the guy to tell him, but were they still black? I have it on good authority that they were. Listen, I'm a reasonable man. I just have some questions. So at what point did the blacks get replaced by the Jews, who were then replaced by the Mexicans? Before we get into this wacky-ass nonsense, I would like to say that I'll be pulling heavily from Mark Evan Davis's paper in Journal of Medieval Iberian Studies, where he speculates upon the exact thing I am. As Davis points out, Diego de Landa doesn't just say the Maya were Jews. He says, some old Yucatan of the men, gave me some evidence, and if what they told me is true, then they would be Jews. It's a little wish-washy, like he's still working through it. This is further complicated by a bombshell I'm saving for the end of the video. For now, let's explore the consequences of, and justifications for, this Cthulhu fucking madness. According to a proponent of the Maya or Jews theory, Friar Diego de Landa, there were 3 big reasons they definitely were. Number 1, they wore sandals and tunics. For this reason, the Romans were also Jewish. I'm sure they'll be sorry to hear that. Number 2, they had myths of wandering in search of a promised land. The Aztec definitely had that. They didn't all have that. Number 3, I ran out of space, whatever. The child sacrifice, the Maya, like the Jews, sacrificed children. we don't have time, okay? We don't have time, all right? What's important is the fact that De Landa bothered to write this down in combination with, frankly, large portions of his account. It all sort of demonstrates this big truth to the way Diego de Landa dealt with the Maya, the information they gave him, and how he fit that information into his pre-existing worldview. When considering Maya life, Landa selects and presents only data that he can grasp and express in terms of his pre-existing European and Christian ideology. Diego de Landa would not, and arguably could not, imagine the things that we know now, that humanity spread out from Africa, and that at certain points spread through Beringia, possibly by hopping down the coast. Watch this video. I'm ride or die with my boy the Kelp Highway hypothesis. Diego de Landa did not perceive the Maya as a product of something outside of the Bible, because nothing was a product of something outside the Bible. The idea that the Maya and other Native Americans were descended from hunter-gatherers who had spread from Northeast Asia more than 10,000 years before Jesus even showed up was unimaginable to him. No one at this time understood how deep the divide went. Frankly, the cat thing should have been a hint. I'd take you on the Exodus, wouldn't I?
It is time. As Moses once took our people on a grand exodus from Egypt, now too must we embark upon a holy journey to escape subservience once again. We travel with nothing, save for our faith in God and our holy covenant with him. And Princess Pearl, we're not bringing the fucking cat. Yes, we are. Also, she's diabetic. Will there be cat insulin on this holy exodus?
Regardless, this idea, while not explicitly endorsed by Diego de Landa, was at the very least considered by him to be worth mentioning. It would continue to be a widely discussed, if somewhat fringe possibility, for centuries, and is still believed by those guys from Utah, what with the underwear and the gold tablets and all that shit. One problem is that Diego de Landa specifically distinguishes between circumcision and Maya penis sacrifice, which other Spaniards at the time used as evidence of the Maya being of Jewish origin. Diego de Landa did not outright say that the Maya were descended from Jews, but he did decide to write down the testimony of a Maya elder, which he believed did, possibly at least, constitute evidence of the Maya being Jewish. He also debunked some evidence others would use without outright disagreeing with the theory. This video is going to go much weirder places than this. He was, at the very least, absolutely exploring the possibility and collecting evidence which supported this, crazy bullshit. But regardless of whether or not Diego de Landa literally believed the Maya to be descended from the Jews, the Maya would come to occupy a similar role in the minds of friars as formerly Jewish conversos did in Spain. The Maya would come to be seen as duplicitous, pretending to be good Christians by day, while still worshipping their dark idols by night. With anti-Semitic history on the contextual horizon, Landa's drastic measures are not surprising. What would be the implications of Jewish Maya, beyond, the existence of kosher tamales or whatever the fuck? In a world where the Maya were descended from the Jews, does that mean something? One of the most persistent ideas in apocalyptical literature was the belief that the Jews would be converted as the end of the world neared. The popularity of the Jewish Indian myth in the New World was due partly to the fact that it provided a kind of explanation for the origin of American man. But I suggest that the real source of appeal for the spread of this curious legend can be found only in the apocalyptical mood of the Age of Discovery. If the Indians were in reality the lost tribes, such a discovery would be convincing evidence that the world was soon to end. Just as the Promised Land had been granted to the children of Israel, so had the New World been granted to Spain. Funnily enough, with these sorts of videos, I always feel like I'm inviting you, viewer, into my mind. And you see the red string and the eyes cut out of women's posters and you say, damn, bitch, you live like this? Anyway, the year is 1490, and Christianity is cooked. It's done. Pack it in, fuckers. Let's just take a look at the scoreboard here. It's not flattering. I really like this new format. I feel like a meteorologist, but for religion. North Africa, we've got a front of Muslims. Here in the Eurasian steppe, Muslims, the Holy Land, Muslims. Not to mention, in a most crippling blow in 1453. Constantinople itself, the city named after and founded by the first Christian emperor of Rome, which had stood for over 1,000 years as the linchpin of the Roman East, fell to Islam. In fact, Charles V would oftentimes be fighting wars with the Turk. The guy fought a lot of fucking wars. His wars with the Turks were so intense that at one point he wrote to his wife, "The Turkish menace has increased so much that I have even considered coming to an agreement with the Lutherans in order to prevent worse disaster." That's how bad things were for Christianity, even after the discovery of the New World. You know, the fact is that Christianity was under attack. And I know that that can feel like a very hollow statement in this time where wine moms on enough Xanax to kill a rapper say shit like that on Facebook all the time because there's, I don't know, no Bible study in public schools. But, like, scoreboard, motherfucker. Christianity was under attack. And brother, it was losing. Trapped in a frozen corner of the earth, cut off from the wider world and unable to mount a crusade, which could actually push back the Muslims permanently, it was pretty clear in the decades before and the decades after the discovery of the New World what the future held for the soul of Europe. As Kenneth Scott Latourette explained in his History of the Expansion of Christianity, to an alien arriving on the earth in 1490, Christianity would appear to be in its death throes, while Islam was already breaking out the victory champagne, or sparkling grape juice. In these desperate times, Christians often took comfort in the things that we all find comfort in, you know? Like the apocalypse. Joachim of Fiore was one such man. He formulated a theory, a game theory, even, that there would be 3 ages to the world. Yeah, motherfucker, we're using the whole board now. Buckle the fuck up. The age of the father, which is like, you know, Old Testament times, garden, snake, woman moment, toil, fratricide, burning bushes, covenants with God, put the fucking golden calf down, you know, that sort of thing. The age of the son, which, you know, was Jesus, you know, New Testament, basically, and what followed. Rome, Pope, Middle Ages, watery tarts and ponds, distributing swords. And now, and this is the important part, the age of the Holy Spirit, in which all people on earth would live together in peaceful harmony. Prior to the age of the Holy Spirit, all the Jews and Muslims would drop their stupid nonsense, miraculously convert, and come to worship at the feet of Christ at the end of time itself. This age was almost at hand. We're here. We're right here. Now, according to Joachim, the age of the Holy Spirit would be ushered in 1260. It happened. I was there. I saw it. You must have not been invited. In his reading of Scripture, Joachim held that in the third and final age of the world, an angelic, seraphic order of spiritual men, or missionaries, would miraculously convert the remaining non-Christians of the world. Naturally, the Franciscans understood this as a reference to their own order. Now, there was one exception to this Christian trend of collecting elves during the Middle Ages. In the Iberian Peninsula. Over centuries, Islam would, as I've said before, be slowly pushed out of Western Europe. And in 1492, the combined might of Ferdinand and Isabella conquered the last Muslim kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula, and with the profits of their conquest, finally decided to give that goofy Italian son of a bitch a chance. The rest you already know. I'm sort of reiterating some things. What's important is that Columbus himself saw in his discovery the last chapter of the Age of the Sun, citing specifically Joachim of Fiore's theory. Most importantly, the Americas would, in time, bring new hope to Christianity. They obviously presented some opportunities for profit for Charles V's endless wars. But furthermore, they presented an avenue of conversion, far away from the Islamic kingdoms which had long surrounded Christianity. Except for Ethiopia. Jews, Ethiopia, Japan. They are always the exceptions in history. I do not make the fucking rules. Now, when does Diego de Landa bring up Joachim of Fiori's theory? He doesn't. Well, not specifically. There's a portion, a very brief portion, which is uncharacteristically flowery and like really well written, as opposed to most of the account, which is frankly pretty sparse and like to the point. In the portion of his account where he's dwelling on the dangers of the Maya backsliding into their old idolatrous religion, Landa writes, "It does not take a lot to see the ruin that has happened for so many years in the great and very Christian Asia and in the good, Catholic, august Africa, and the miseries and calamities that today are happening in our Europe, in our nation and houses. For this we could say we have completed the evangelical prophecies about Jerusalem, which our enemies besiege and stain with blood. They will grip it so much that they will crush it to earth." I obviously do not like this guy very much, but that goes hard. De Landa goes on to paraphrase a passage from the Bible, Romans 9:29, which states, "And as Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left us offspring, we would have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah." Mark Evan Davis gets into the weeds with this hot fire, explaining, "For De Landa, the conversion of the Maya is inseparable from progress towards the fulfillment of apocalyptic prophecy. Moreover, the crucial importance of the successful and sincere conversion of the Native Americans also becomes clear in this passage. Landa seems to have little hope that the church will survive in the Old World. Its cradle in the Holy Land has long fallen to Muslim invaders, so have Asia and Africa. The heart of Christendom, Europe, is also threatened by the Turks in the east, and worse, is home to the heretical Protestants in the north, and seems ready to succumb to calamity at any moment." The vague reference to our nation and houses is interesting in that it would seem to indicate that Landa feels that even the Christianity of Catholic Spain is questionable. I really want to emphasize that last sentence that he just said. Diego de Landa believed that 16th century Spain was not Catholic enough. This is the kind of person that we are dealing with here. Joachim's epic gamer theory falls under the umbrella of what we call... You thought I was going to run out of space again, didn't you? Joachim's theory falls under the umbrella of what we call millenarianism, a religious belief in an upcoming apocalypse. This has taken many forms in Christianity. It actually precedes Christianity by quite a bit. But in the specifically Christian interpretation, it's usually drawing from Revelations 20, which is a passage which describes an angel descending from heaven, probably Jesus, crossing Satan on the court, and Jesus then rules for 1,000 years. That's actually a particular strain of millenarianism called millennialism, which is like millenarianism, except no one is going to Applebee's and everyone's eating avocado toast, I guess. It doesn't matter. Someone in the comments is gonna... Fuck you, comment person. The distinction doesn't matter, not for our purposes today. We are here to feast upon the madness of a dead man. That only gets in the way. Diego de Landa studied at a millenarian convent. He even belonged to the observant branch of the Franciscan order, which was particularly known for its millenarian ideals. Landa entered the convent of San Juan de los Reyes at the age of 16 in 1541. Almost since its inception, the convent had been under the control of the observant wing of the Order of St. Francis. The observants were the most ardent advocates of the seraphic role that they believed Franciscans had in hastening the apocalyptic second coming of Christ. And thus, by the time Landa took his vows at age 18, he was well immersed in millenarian ideology. We've sort of been digging into the theological foundations of this sort of belief, and that can make the whole thing feel a little silly to us now. It's easy to discount this as ridiculous nonsense. I've sort of been doing that. But what continues to strike me about early Spanish colonization is the sense that the world was ending. In the Florentine Codex, Bernardino de Sahagún claimed to have personally buried 10,000 inhabitants of the former Aztec Empire due to disease alone. In the early years of Spanish colonization, we are looking at demographic collapse. This absolutely cannot be attributed exclusively to disease. Spanish brutality, absolutely played a part, not to mention ecological shock from the introduction of not just old world diseases, but old world plants, animals, and pests. We are talking about a flood of invasive species, unimaginable to us now. Bartolomé de las Casas described fire ants so thick on Hispaniola that entire plantations rotted, and men had to place the bases of their bedposts into buckets to keep the ants from crawling all over them in the night. Shortly thereafter, as I alluded to earlier, a German decided to be a little troublemaker. I'm sure it won't happen again, as the unintentional and intentional consequences of Spanish colonization killed countless natives. This great dying was only fuel to the fires of zealotry. The more Native Americans that died, well, all the more vital it became for conversions to take hold, not even necessarily in the name of ushering in the apocalypse, but also because countless souls were being lost alarmingly fast. While not every Franciscan believed that they were playing a key role in the imminent apocalypse, the most extreme members of the order absolutely did. Diego de Landa, if nothing else, falls under that category. These men fell for it. The idea that the ends justify the means, but the ends can never justify the means. Nothing ever ends. We've been playing around in probably the most esoteric shit that I've ever covered on this channel. We've considered the deep-seated paranoia of Spanish Catholicism and Inquisitions, a batshit theory about where Native Americans came from, and the apocalyptic prophecies of the late medieval age in Europe. But now, we're gonna come back to Earth. We're gonna get into the nitty-gritty, the conquest of the Yucatan, and the murky political reality which followed. This is not the story of a supposedly glorious conquest. It's the story of what followed, and the opportunities that chaos presents for the ambitious man. The Maya were first encountered by the Europeans on Columbus's fourth voyage, and frankly, it was a little anticlimactic. They just saw a canoe loaded down with some trade goods, and Columbus, being Italian, stole some shit and kidnapped one of them. In the following decades, encounters between the Spanish and the Maya would continue to occur. The island of Cozumel would become a common way station on the way to Mexico. The Cortez, Cordoba, and Grijalva expeditions, which I have discussed before, would fight and interact with them a bit. But these men's attentions would largely be redirected by the Maya to the much more wealthy Aztec Empire. But after the conquest of Mexico, the Maya would once again be treated to Iberian hospitality. It took 3 separate invasions to conquer the Yucatan. These were long and difficult wars, and they don't have a lot of bearing on the topic at hand today, but I have to tell you why the second one failed.
You savages, living in the jungle and drinking blood from skulls. I will drag you into heaven, or send you to hell myself. Lay down your crude weaponry, or feel the thundering wrath of a cavalry charge. You think we fear men so soft they wear metal in the burning sun? You dare call us savages, while you've traveled across half the earth to burn our cities. This is our land, Spaniard. Turn back while you gonna answer that? Yeah, God, I'm so sorry. 1 second. Yellow?
Oh my god, is that actually how he answers the phone?
Yeah, just dying in the jungle. You know how it be. What are you up to? What? Hundreds of miles from here. Mountains. Rope bridges. Potatoes. Money? That's my goddamn money! Don't you dare fucking touch it! I'm sorry. It looks like there's better shit to steal over in the Andes from some guys called the Inca, I think. We'll put a pin in this conquest and come back later.
By the end of 1534, the Spanish had totally abandoned the peninsula so they could get in on that Peruvian gold rush. We could frame this as the Maya being broke as fuck. Frankly, who isn't broke as fuck next to the baller-ass Sapa Inca? I feel it. But there's a deeper truth at play here. The Maya were really fucking good at killing Spaniards. Good enough that they were a massive pain in the ass. This is a trait that they shared with the notoriously bellicose warriors of Florida, the Calusa. In fact, even after the third expedition finally succeeded in establishing a Spanish city on the peninsula, which was named Merida, fighting would continue for almost half a decade. It took 30 years, albeit 30 non-consecutive years of intermittent warfare, to wear the Maya of the Yucatan down. Credit for the conquest would be attributed to the Montejos, the father-son duo who led all three expeditions. In the 16th century, father-son bonding was usually just a war of conquest.
Son, you did this all for me? I just wanted you to be proud of me, Dad.
Fun fact for the alcoholic portion of the Cobbler fan base, it doesn't show me on my analytics, but I can tell. Montejo Group, the original producers of Corona, Modelo, really all the big Mexican beers except for Dos Equis, is named after the Montejos. Very effective marketing. I once bought a bottle of tequila called Montezuma's Silver, just because of its name. It cost $10 for a liter. The following day was spent shitting blood. And that's why we call it Montezuma's Revenge. The pacification of the Yucatan was a long and complex process, and the conclusion was somewhat uneasy, with a small set of conquistadors becoming encomenderos, which made them able to demand tribute in the form of labor and goods from the Maya. While most of the Yucatan was paying tribute to the Spanish by this point, the southeastern portion of the peninsula remained a holdout. Maya who wished to escape the encomienda system would often flee to this area, which continued to defy the Spanish crown for an exceptionally long time. In 1502, Christopher Columbus encountered the Maya, and almost 200 years later, the last Maya city fell. It seems almost beyond belief that Tayasal fell to the Spaniards only in 1697. While students at Harvard College were scratching their heads over Cotton Mather's theology, Maya priests 2,000 miles away were still chanting rituals from hieroglyphic books. While the Maya had raised civilization from the Yucatan, their newfound overlords struggled to raise a meager profit. The Maya were not particularly rich in precious metals, cattle did not fare well in the climate, and cash crops like sugarcane struggled in the thin soil. While selling the Maya into slavery was a profitable endeavor, this would be curtailed in the late 1540s by the crown. It's big government for you. Listen, slavery is bad, but let's not get too libtarded about all this. Is slaver not just another word for job creator? From the time of their initial contact with the Maya, the Spaniards learned, to their bitter disappointment, that there were no sources of gold and silver in the Maya lowlands, and soon came to look upon the region as a hardship post. Spanish settlement would be scant in the peninsula as a reflection of the little profit to be made there. By the time Diego de Landa would arrive in 1549, Merida had 70 or more citizens, Valladolid 45, Campeche perhaps 40, and Salamanca de Bacalar 15 or 20. We should not imagine the Spanish bulldozing the Maya and building Spanish towns atop them immediately. The reality of the Yucatan, in the immediate aftermath of the conquest, was a Maya ocean, peppered with small islands of Spanish control. But in the houses of these encomenderos, Maya servants cooked, cleaned, and raised the children. While certainly no sacrifice or idolatry was occurring within eyesight of these few encomenderos, it's difficult to imagine a Spanish way of life being enforced across the broader peninsula. Tribute was delivered, the floors were swept, the Spaniards kicked up their feet and enjoyed the fruits of their conquest. What happened in the jungle beyond the edges of town was, as long as tribute was delivered on time, of very little concern. But there was a very small group on the peninsula, and that jungle was that group's only concern. In 1544, 8 friars were tasked with the conversion of the Yucatan, a paltry number, obviously, but that was the case just about everywhere in the Spanish New World. Also, as in other parts of the New World, the friars and encomenderos hated each other. Their desires were at odds with one another. The friars wanted to observe and instruct the natives in Christianity, which was made difficult by encomenderos giving a negative impression of the Spanish. And encomenderos didn't want their free labor being taught to read Jesus shit all fucking day. In the Yucatan, possibly as a consequence of the encomenderos not being nearly as wealthy and powerful as they were in other places, the friars would manage to wield a surprising amount of political power. A lot of this political power can be attributed to the actions of Diego de Landa, but we'll get to that later. For now, they did manage to seize a surprising amount of power by acting on the recommendation of a judge who had been dispatched to the region, Lopez Mendel. Mendel recommended the Maya be moved to centralized locations so they could be more effectively controlled, instructed, and observed. A reordering and restructuring of Maya society in order to make it a mirror of Spanish society. They called this Relaccion. The human cost of this would be devastating. Official counts indicate that a loss of 50 to 70% of tributaries, whether through death or flight, was not uncommon. The tough encomenderos of the Valladolid region, where the friars behaved with singular ruthlessness, were especially outraged, and apparently twice burnt down the local Franciscan monastery to express their feelings. The long drawn-out legal battle between the friars and encomenderos of the Yucatan would come to a head with Francisco Hernandez. Now you may be saying, who the fuck is Francisco Hernandez? Exactly. The Spanish were a litigious people.
Nice conquest, buddy. What are you gonna do with all that loot? Well, it's always been my dream to explore far-off lands, fight for the glory of God in Spain, and of course, sue the shit out of everyone. I've written down the name right here of everyone that's ever mildly wronged me, and now it's time for revenge. Wow, that sounds like a massive waste of time and energy.
As a consequence of the Spaniards' obsession with fucking lawsuits and legalese, Francisco Hernandez's story is very long and complex. I promise you, you do not want me to go over the whole thing. I was treated to a brief overview of it in Ambivalent Conquest by Inga Clendinden, and even that was too fucking much. What's important is that he went after the friars in the courts after they collected some children from his encomienda for education, and he would lose everything, including his health, in the process, due to the tireless political maneuvering of Diego de Landa. When Hernandez started his attack on the friars, he held 2 villages in encomienda. He had been one of the original conquerors of the Yucatan. He was wealthy, powerful, and respected. By the time Diego de Landa was done fighting him in court, he died in prison at the age of 42, humiliated and penniless. Hernandez probably doesn't solicit a lot of pity from you, viewer, but he serves as an example of what happened to those foolish enough to question the authority of Diego de Landa. This is a key quality to de Landa, his need to both take and exercise political control. The alcalde mayor of the Yucatan, which is the regional governor, wrote about Diego de Landa in a letter to the crown, and there is in this province a friar called Diego de Landa, who, because I have taken this matter up, bears me ill will. He enjoys broils and having a finger in every pie, and he expects to rule both in spiritual and mortal matters. He's a bad-tempered man, and I'm afraid he will write to your majesty's council to my injury. I wish your majesty to understand that he has always been inflamed against those who have governed here, as he is against me. May your majesty never believe that I harbor ill will against him or any other man of religion, for they I support to the limit of my strength, for in their hands lies the Christian welfare of the Indians, and without them all is in vain. Can you feel the fear? This is the most powerful Spanish official in the Yucatan, and he's fucking terrified of Diego de Landa. That Spanish official will return. He showed his butt to someone once. Allegedly. But the fact is that all allegations are true if they are funny. You can see Diego de Landa's perspective on the encomenderos, which he wrestled political power away from, in his account. The conquistadors, who eventually became encomenderos, are discussed, save for the Montejos, as absolute monsters. The conquistadors committed unheard-of cruelties, cutting off noses, arms, and legs, and the breasts of the women, throwing them into deep lagoons with gourds tied to their feet, stabbing at the children with spears because they could not walk as fast as their mothers. Don Francisco de Monteja did not commit any of these cruelties nor approved them. On the contrary, they seemed very wicked to him, but he could do nothing.
Conquistador, cease this barbarous cruelty. I demand it at once. Actually, I'm practicing self-care. I'm in my space. I am flourishing. I'm cutting women's tits off. Oh, well, mental health is important. I'm glad you're taking time for self-care. You were brave. You were seen. You were valid.
The pro-Montejo passages in the account are very much Landa's spin on conquest events, and the text lacks even a hint of ambiguity here. Landa, with his allies among the Franciscans in Yucatan, established from the start a clear and consistent political alliance with the Montejo family and their faction among the new settlers. As noted in The Friar and the Maya, while there was significant political conflict between the encomenderos and the church, the closer you look, the more complex that conflict becomes. The Montejos were allies of De Landa, and the man who would eventually prove to be Landa's greatest enemy will be a bishop. Regardless, we can see with Diego de Landa's Inquisition a political angle, and the core of that political conflict was the fundamentally opposite goals of the friars and encomenderos. From the friars' perspectives, the soul of hundreds of thousands of Maya, and indeed the very world, was at stake. What will define this story, once we're done listing the myriad ways in which De Landa was fucking deranged, is authority. The struggle for authority would define Landa's rise, fall, and rise again. But we have two more motivations to consider before we get into what actually occurred that horrible summer. These are, by far, the most emotional. We've considered the religion and politics of Diego de Landa, but now we must consider his very soul. Diego de Landa loved titties. The Indian women of Yucatan are in general better put together than Spanish women, larger and well-formed, lacking the large haunches of black women. Those who are beautiful pride themselves on it, and on the one hand, they are not ugly, although they are not white, but of a brown color, caused more by the sun and by constant bathing than from their nature. They do not make up their faces, as our nation does, considering this trivial. Diego de Landa differed from Sir Mix-a-Lot in many ways. Where Diego de Landa chose a life of religion, Sir Mix-a-Lot was of course an anointed knight. Furthermore, they had very different taste in women, with De Landa, to paraphrase, not much liking big buns, hun. He also, as you heard, he spends a little bit of time discussing how they're not really brown, alright? It's the sun. And baths. Let's quit dancing around it. Diego de Landa thought Maya women were a little hot, and he was sort of embarrassed about it. Everyone's got a type. The way he emphasizes that they're not really brown, the way he admires their figures and general modesty, it's not subtle. And the Friar and the Maya gets into De Landa's thoughts on Maya women and children quite a bit in Chapter 6. While Landa did not beat or sexually assault Maya women in the manner of his secular brethren, nonetheless he exercised power over their bodies by his frank expressions of desire. Maya women's breasts are mentioned 10 separate times in the account, and his reimagination of these bodies is compliant with his other desire, their authentic conversion. Then later, in The Friar and the Maya, the authors write in regards to De Landa's imperfect and incomplete writings on the economic activities of Maya women. In contrast to the weaving which Maya women spent a great deal of time on, Landa mentions animal husbandry, perhaps because this was a more publicly visible activity, or perhaps because he was so focused on women's breasts. As I'm sure you can imagine, viewer, I have a habit of laughing at history books, usually at wildly inappropriate times. But I've never laughed this hard at a history book before, so congrats to these 4 authors. Also, in De Landa's account, he specifically remarks upon how large Maya women's breasts are. They are excellent nursemaids. The continual grinding of the maize does not allow them to keep their breasts cramped, making them be very large ones, from which come a lot of milk. He talks about Maya women nursing a lot, in general, way more than you would expect. Do you remember in the introduction to this video, when I told you that the textbooks don't tell you how the dead men slept? They also do not tell you what gets dead men hard. Alright, we're pretty clearly off the fucking rails now. It's all tangential to the actual subject of this chapter. I obviously did not have a choice. I had to tell you this shit. But on to the matter at hand. At the root of the Landa conundrum, as we have termed the paradoxes surrounding his actions and writings, lies a frustration over his inability to understand and command, shape, and control the Maya. Having infiltrated and invaded their communities, the Friar desperately wanted to believe that Maya families should, could, and were being converted and colonized. Reality was less reassuring. Diego de Landa, from his perspective, was not hurting the Maya. He was disciplining them for their failure to be what he made them out to be in his head. He regarded the Maya as childlike and deceived simpletons who had been misled by their old religious leaders. That's right. Diego de Landa considered himself to be their daddy. And sometimes daddy must discipline his children. There was a gendered dimension to this in the account. Women were, due to the prevailing attitude towards Spanish women at the time, considered to be little babies who were tricked by the big bad devil worshippers, despite the fact that Maya women wielded considerable power compared to Spanish women, not just in their households, but politically. In particular, Maya women would often act as diplomats in the pre-Columbian period. Under de Landa's nose, his authority, which he was always fighting for, was usurped by the old power structure of the Yucatan. But it's not just about control and titties. We must emphasize that de Landa spent more than 10 years working endlessly to convert the Maya before he learned that some were still practicing idolatry. There is a betrayal there. He had, from his point of view, worked his fingers to the bone, fighting the exploitative and cruel encomenderos on their behalf. Even the forced relocation of the Maya, a destructive and cruel act, was, from de Landa's point of view, the greatest gift he could have given them. He gave them salvation. He saved them from their old, devil-worshipping lords and priests, and from the cruel, exploitative encomenderos, and this is how they repaid him. He taught them the word of God, and yet they returned to the deceptions of their old priests. Consider this passage, where Landa explains who led the Maya to backslide into their old idolatries, and then how his Inquisition corrected that failure. After the people had been instructed in Christian religion and the young boys advanced in their studies, as we said, they were corrupted by the priests because of their idolatries, and by the lords into returning to their idolatries, and making sacrifices not only of incense, but also of human blood. Concerning this, the friars held an inquisition, and asked for the aid of the alcalde mayor, arresting many. In general, they all showed much repentance and a willingness to become good Christians. When a parent punishes their child, at least ideally, it's just to alter future behavior. Like when my dad sent me to bed without supper for taking cats apart. This incorrect behavior was not a result of the Maya being evil necessarily, but because they were being actively misguided by their priests and lords. Diego de Landa didn't hate the Maya, he loved them. And his love just so happened to be horrible and unimaginably fucked up. I would not wish Diego de Landa's love on my worst enemy. It came with expectations. Your titty milk. Give it to me. With the Indians of Yucatan, de Landa had a special relationship. His experiences with the Maya in his days as a solitary missionary had been gratifying at the deepest level of his personality, and had set the psychological mood for his later relationship with them. Alone, a stranger, without the external trappings of power or the backing of force, armed only with his righteousness, he had gone among them, and they had recognized him. They had perceived the truth of his authority and the truth of his message, as he thought. It is possible that his friendship with the old men who were his informants were among the most emotionally rewarding of his life. With the revelation of their secret persistence in idolatry, he concluded that they had betrayed him, and proceeded to punish them, and to strive to wrench the last root of opposition out of them.
Hello, I'm Chris Brown. You may know me from other instructional tapes, such as So She Won't Shut Her Whore Mouth, and A Boxer's Guide to Amateur Rhinoplasty. I'm here today to speak to you on a condition which has affected many friars of the mendicant orders: jungle madness. Jungle madness is an affliction which can be caused by numerous factors, such as being taught to be paranoid and distrustful of religious conversions, subscribing to deranged theories about the Jewish people, believing the end of the world to be at hand and that you personally must help usher it in, living in a politically chaotic and nebulous environment where power must be seized so as to save souls, feeling a deep sense of betrayal at people not dropping their old culture like a fat sack of shit just because you said so, and, of course, the devil is winning. He's winning and it's your fault. Many men have learned to live with jungle madness through healthy diet, regular exercise, and paranoid acts of mass brutality which live in infamy for centuries. As the jungle closes in around you, as the doubts creep into your mind on those long nights where sleep does not come, it's always important to remember the words of Spanish Franciscan friar Alfonso de Espina. Heresies are useful to the Church of God.
Diego de Landa was born 3 years after the fall of the Aztec in 1524 in the Spanish town of Cifuentes. He would go on to, as a member of the nobility, find himself in the employ of the Count of Cifuentes as a page. As page to the Count, he would rub elbows with the royal family, including Philip II, the eventual successor to Charles the Chin Wonder V. Interestingly enough, Charles V would advise Philip II, you should not permit heresies to enter your kingdoms. To avoid this, you should favor the Holy Inquisition. But despite rubbing elbows with the creme de la creme of inbred whack jobs, de Landa would find himself drawn to the faith, and in time would study to be a friar of the Franciscan order at the convent of San Juan de los Reyes. At the convent, missionaries from the New World would often come and speak to the young students, and we can only assume that these stories of a far-off land inspired him. To be a friar of the Yucatan, or the New World in general, was a lifelong and difficult appointment. While I have painted a picture of Diego de Landa as a true madman, a man who believed the end was nigh, who saw the devil in every shadow, and who loved himself some fat old titties, we should understand that he just must have been a romantic at some point. There was a time where a young and devout man was inspired by tales of a land beyond the sunset, which needed him. Diego de Landa arrived in the Yucatan in 1549, at the age of 25. While he was in the second group of friars to arrive in the peninsula, the missionary project had only just begun. Despite the young friar's asthma, which should have been a hindrance in the hot and humid Yucatan, he proved to be a tireless missionary. To quote from the indispensable The Friar and the Maya, by all accounts, Landa was one of the most driven and energetic of the Franciscans who labored in Yucatan in the 1550s. During that decade, he devoted himself to the creation of a Yucatec church in the form of a network of convents, village churches, and converted Maya parishioners. But his crowning achievement, if one puts aside the loss of the Maya buildings thereby destroyed, was the transformation of the pre-contact Maya metropolis of Itzamal into one of the most impressive monastic complexes in the Americas, and the most extraordinary in the whole Maya area. Diego de Landa spent the 1550s traveling, teaching, learning, and converting. He was a tireless and passionate man, inspiring to both Maya and his fellow friar alike. In 1561, two things happened which established the conditions necessary for his later brutal inquisition. First, he was chosen as provincial, which was the head of the Franciscan order in the region. And second, the aforementioned, once wealthy and proud conquistador, Francisco Hernandez, died in prison, penniless, and humiliated by Diego de Landa. He would serve as a haunting example of what became of men who questioned the ambitious young friar. With the alcalde mayor of the Yucatan, Don Diego Quijada, being terrified of Diego de Landa's fervor and political acumen, there was, by 1562, no one to stop him. Through tireless labor, political maneuvering, and intimidation, by the burning of old Maya homes and forcing them into Spanish-style towns under the watchful eyes of his local friars, Diego de Landa, without an army, without even a sword to his name, conquered the Yucatan. After more than a decade of this tireless labor, two young Maya, who'd been hunting in the province of Mani in May of 1562, stumbled across a cave. Contained within were a collection of idols and human bones. They returned to their village and told the local friar, who had the bones and idols collected and inspected. The Maya who lived nearest the cave were imprisoned, questioned, and they confessed that they, and indeed other Maya in the area, had continued to worship their idols. What is important to note is that there was no evidence of human sacrifice. There were offerings of blood to these idols, but the Maya practiced bloodletting on themselves.
This is my last resort. Suffocation.
But this revelation that Mani, which was an ally of the Spanish during the conquest of the Yucatan, it was the heart of Franciscan conversion efforts. The fact that it was home to scores of still idolatrous Maya struck at the very heart of typical Spanish fears. Fears that they had, in truth, converted no one. The friars acted swiftly and with great brutality. They began conducting public tortures, primarily hoisting, a method wherein the Maya were strung up by their wrists and had stones tied to their feet. According to a Spanish eyewitness, if hoisting did not result in an immediate admission of guilt, they would be flogged with a lash until the confession came. Inquisitions were, by papal bull, papal bull means Pope law. Inquisitions were permitted by papal bull to be conducted by the ranking Franciscan friar if a bishop was more than 3 days' ride away. But all the same, the sheer brutality and fervor of the Mani Inquisition was not typical and did exceed what was legally allowed by the governing body of the Spanish New World, which was called the Council of the Indies. When Diego de Landa arrived in Mani, the scale of the Inquisition grew much larger. More than 4,500 Indians were put to the torture during the 3 months of the Inquisition, and an official inquiry later established that 158 had died during, or as a direct result of, the interrogations. At least 13 people were known to have committed suicide to escape the torture, while 18 others, who had disappeared, were thought to have killed themselves. Many more had been left crippled, their shoulder muscles irreparably torn, their hands paralyzed like hooks. Diego de Landa would write later, in order to justify the brutality of his Inquisition, all the Indians being idolaters and guilty, it was not possible to proceed strictly judiciously against them, because if we had proceeded with all according to the order of the law, it would be impossible to finish with the province of Mani alone in 20 years, and meanwhile they would all become idolaters and go to hell. On July 12th, 1562, an auto da fe was celebrated. An auto da fe was a public passing of sentences and administration of inquisitorial punishments. In a grand public performance of zealotry, pageantry, and brutality, sentences were passed and punishments were delivered upon men who had already been lashed raw and bloody in the name of a mad god. Countless Maya artifacts, dozens of codices, as well as the bodies of Maya who had been executed, were burned. We should consider, of course, not only the writings and carvings lost, but the suffering and loss of those who had carved, written, and protected these products of a fascinating and ancient culture. One youth who had failed to disclose his father's ownership of 2 idols was tied to a post and lashed 200 times. The most brutal tortures were perpetuated by a friar named Miguel de la Puebla. He would go so far as to force-feed water to victims until their bellies distended and were near bursting, at which point he would jump on their stomachs, forcing water, blood, and mucus to burst from their noses and mouths. The Maya were, according to encomenderos, confessing to the possession of idols which they did not have. Like, they were being tortured to such an extent that they were making false confessions. The Maya were, therefore, compelled to dig ancient idols out from ruins in desperation. To the friars, though, these dilapidated idols were evidence that the Maya were just surrendering only old and broken idols, rather than the ones which they still were definitely worshipping somewhere in the jungles and caves of the Yucatan. For 1 year, Diego de Landa was the most powerful man in the Yucatan. And so it bled. The alcalde mayor, Quijada, by being present at the auto de fe and even giving a speech there, now appeared to support the actions of the friars. We should perceive the auto de fe not only as an act of brutality, but also as a powerful political statement, a demonstration of the power wielded by the friars of the Yucatan, and through Quijada's inclusion, an attempt to further strengthen their grip on the politics of the region. Under threat of excommunication, Quijada was even compelled to participate in the torture of the Maya himself. This has all been a little heavy, it's a brutal moment in history. But there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Because now, in this moment, I finally get to call this dead bitch a fucking liar. Ugh, this chalk, this doesn't taste as good as Crayola brand. Ugh. Only name brand chalk for me from now on. After that infamous day, De Landa was called to the city of Sotuta. The Maya lord of the province had recently killed himself in prison so that he wouldn't have to face the torture. At this point, a brutal, self-sustaining cycle had begun. Many of the Maya, rather than face the torture which the friars brought, began to kill themselves. To these friars, these acts of suicide were admissions of guilt. When the town council, the Cabildo of Merida, the capital in the Yucatan, came up to De Landa and said, hey, you need to slow down, you need to show some mercy here, you are going too far, he didn't. He just said no. With the alcalde mayor Quijada on his side, he could not be stopped. Until the arrival of the first bishop of the Yucatan, Francisco de Toral. Longtime viewers may remember my discussion of Bernardino de Sahagun's Encyclopedia of the Nahua World, now called the Florentine Codex. Toral had a part in promoting its creation. He even relieved Sahagun of his routine duties so that he may focus exclusively on that project. While the Florentine Codex is certainly not a pure window into the pre-conquest Nahua, it still remains an invaluable source in a world where mostly the testimony of conquistadors is what has survived. Bishop Toral arrived in Merida on August 14th, but remember, as I said, Diego de Landa had been called to Sotuta. And while de Landa was in Sotuta, he kept Bishop Toral waiting for like a week. Now, I told you why Diego de Landa went to Sotuta. But what was he actually doing there? Well, you see, he was justifying every single drop of Mayan blood which had been spilled. As I said, all the accusations centered around idolatry and respectfully. So the fuck what? So you got a skull covered in jewels? You got an incense burner? Even if you had a scary looking statue that you gave maize and dick blood to sometimes, like, who cares? I think that's cool. It's important to have hobbies. But human sacrifice, well, that's something else entirely, isn't it? Particularly of the sort that De Landa uncovered in Sotuta. If you were to ask me to invent a situation, like a story that would drive every Spaniard anywhere mad, I couldn't come up with a better one. According to the testimony, Diego de Landa procured from two young men in Sotuta. Multiple children had been crucified inside the town's church at night. most of them during the week of Easter, before their hearts were cut out and their corpses were tossed into cenotes, which were, I cannot believe I talked about the Maya this long without talking about cenotes. They're the really cool lakes. We now go live to the recording of me reacting to this story the first time I heard it.
This bitch.
I'm not a historian. I don't have a degree. I have a problem, frankly. I remember Dan Carlin once sort of pulled this card, like he gets to get away with things that a real historian can't. Now, I'm no Dan Carlin either. I'm just some sort of gremlin at the bottom of the internet, just sort of... So I get to really do shit that others can't get away with. I get to call these Sotuta confessions what they fucking are, but with a little bit of force behind it. I don't gotta couch it all in academic language and arguments and all that shit. No. This is a fucking lie. This did not happen. This man wrote the nastiest skank bitch shit I've ever read. Do not trust him. He is a fugly slut. It's a little fucking convenient, isn't it? After months of torture and questioning, 0 acts of human sacrifice had been confessed to, yet mere days after the arrival of the one guy who could punish Diego de Landa for all the shit he's been doing, he suddenly uncovered not only acts of human sacrifice, but sacrifice occurring in such a way that it would drive any Spaniard insane. Do you remember that one of the reasons Diego de Landa said that the Jews were like the Maya, or well, he was talking about the Aztec, but you know, it's all made up, who cares? Anyway, one of the reasons that I said he thought the Jews were like Mesoamericans was because they both sacrificed children. And I said we didn't have time. I lied to you. We always make time for the things we love. It's called self-care. Blood libel was an anti-Semitic accusation levied at Jews during the later part of the Middle Ages. The accusation was that Jews would sacrifice children, using their blood to make bread for Passover in a mockery of Jesus Christ and the Eucharist. Once again, for my viewers who worship the phone book rippers, I should clarify, the Eucharist is the thing, like the blood and the body of Christ, the crackers and wine thing the Catholics do. You know what I'm talking about. In particular, the Sotuta Confessions bear a striking resemblance to the case of blood libel, which directly preceded, and indeed most likely caused, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. You know what I love about history? My overwhelming need to connect everything is considered a good thing, and not just something that makes me very unpleasant to have at dinner.
Uncle Cobbler, why do you always have to sit at our table instead of with the grown-ups at Thanksgiving? Because when the sweet potatoes are brought out, I start talking about erotic mochi sculptures. My dad said it's 'cause you're really annoying. No, Timmy. It's because he's afraid of the truth. And sexy, sexy sculptures. I couldn't help but notice you're enjoying corn on the cob, Timmy. Would you like to discuss Xipe Totec, the flayed lord of the Aztec?
In the year 1491, a Spanish Inquisition uncovered a case wherein a group of formerly Jewish conversos, and still practicing Jews, crucified children before cutting their hearts out on the week of Easter in a mockery of Christ's crucifixion. It's crazy that the Maya and the Jews do have such similar religious practices. Either they have identical religious... Did the Jews teach the Maya this? Like, it's legitimately... I fucking hate this man so goddamn much. This case would be used by the Inquisitor General, Tomás de Torquemada, to argue for the expulsion of Jews from Spain, which would be decreed by Isabella the next year. The similarities between the Sotuta Confessions and older accusations of blood libel levied against the Jews and conversos is analyzed in Alejandro Enriquez's paper, The Exuberant Imagination, Blood Libel and the Myth of Maya Ritual Murder in the 1562 Sotuta Confessions, which was invaluable to my research for this video. Thank you, that's an excellent paper. I emailed him and he sent it to me. What a guy. Make the name of your fucking paper shorter. Just all of you.
The idolatry trials elicited, through torture, confessions of ritual murder to justify the punishment of the Maya elite. These stories bear striking resemblance to the tales of Jewish ritual murder fabricated and propagated by the Franciscans in Europe, with necessary adjustments made to replace the European Jew/converso with the Yucatec Maya as the culprit. Surely there was political resistance, and Mayas capable of harming the Christians, just as there was cultural resistance and syncretism. That the Maya would manifest such resistance in ways so similar to the Franciscans' beliefs about the Jews is highly suspect.
Once again, we can see how Maya converts came to occupy a similar place to Jewish converts in the minds of Spanish friars, regardless of whether or not Diego de Landa literally perceived them to be Jews, although, it has been argued convincingly, in my opinion, that he did. The Sotuta Confessions do not reflect any sort of reality. They reflect the fantasy of Diego de Landa, a fantasy that he needed for political reasons, so that his brutality against the Maya, which was utterly beyond the pale of accepted inquisitorial practice at this time and place, could look like a harsh but necessary investigation. Once de Landa was done torturing the Maya until they admitted that they were Jewish, he finally went to the capital of the Yucatan and met the irritated Bishop Toral. Toral then instituted a blanket ban on torture and began investigating these claims of sacrifice himself. He went to the prisons housing the accused and found that, shockingly, many had the same story.
That? Oh, I lied about that. Why? Because I wanted them to stop fucking torturing me. I see. And did they?
In 1562, Toral stopped the idolatry trials, and his investigation exonerated the accused of ritual murder.
With torture no longer being used to elicit confessions, this all suddenly began to look a lot more flimsy. The brutal Inquisition of the Maya buckled and broke beneath the weight of actual scrutiny. Diego de Landa, having far exceeded the limited authority he had, was called to Spain to be investigated for his conduct. The alcalde mayor of the Yucatan, now compromised due to his association with Diego de Landa, was dragged through the courts by the now furious encomenderos. They accused him of being a weak, artsy layabout who spent his days playing the guitar, singing in the street, and entertaining prostitutes rather than doing his fucking job. One encomendero even accused him of exposing his butt to some of his friends and a prostitute before declaring that his butt was skinny as a rabbit's. Now, Inga Clendinen said that these charges were likely false. However, she failed to consider that they were funny and therefore did happen. An investigation, though, did find that the man was probably guilty of nothing more than playing his guitar and singing in the privacy of his home. Over the next decade, Bishop Toral strived to undo the political maneuverings of Diego de Landa, attempting to end the Franciscan monopoly over the souls of the Maya. He even reversed many sentences passed against the Maya who were victimized by Diego de Landa's Inquisition. However, the friars left behind worked to frustrate Indian all attempts to curb their authority. Bishop Toral was driven to such frustration and anguish by the friars of the Yucatan that he asked to be relieved of his position as bishop on March 6th, 1569. Before he received a response to his request, he had already left the Yucatan, returning to central Mexico where he had spent most of his career. He died in Mexico City in April of 1571. So the position of Bishop of the Yucatan was now open, and they had just the man for the job. Diego de Landa would become the second bishop of the Yucatan. He was now older, wiser, and fucking furious! He had been found innocent of wrongdoing, possibly, I'm just saying, by wielding the evidence of human sacrifice which he made the fuck up as proof that his actions were a necessary act. He had to prevent the Maya from backsliding into their old Jewish ways. It could also be that his childhood spent rubbing elbows with the big boys in the royal court led to him having some friends at court. But this is just pure speculation on my part. The man was, however, clearly very good at politics. Diego de Landa changed very little in his decade away from the Yucatan. Just prior to de Landa's reappearance, 2 Franciscan friars had earned the ire of the new alcalde mayor of the Yucatan, who was named Velázquez, by preaching publicly that he smelled and got no hose. Velázquez did that thing that all Spaniards do when their honor was called into question, and that was sue the shit out of them. Of course, de Landa being de Landa, he sought to protect these 2 friars. Velázquez demanded that he hand them over, and de Landa responded by excommunicating him. Velázquez was absolutely tougher than the alcalde mayor Quijada,
who De Landa had been giving wedgies to basically from the second he'd arrived in the Yucatan. Just contrast Quijada's terrified letter, which I read earlier, with what Velázquez said directly to the face of one of De Landa's friars. "By the body of Christ, now the bishop again. If he has 2 balls, I have 4, and I swear to God if I could, I would mount him and his Fray Gregorio. I swear I would lock them within a room and let them die of hunger." Listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I could have just skipped right to the death of Diego de Landa from him becoming bishop, but I had to talk about these 2 fucking guys. They hated each other. At one point, in an effort to get his hands on those 2 meddling mendicants who were supposedly holed up in De Landa's residence, Velázquez had a locksmith break the lock. Then once he entered, he found that De Landa had already sent them out of the region. King Philip II himself took De Landa's side, and he wrote to the furious alcalde mayor, "We have been informed that you have a great dispute with the bishop of that land and with the religious Franciscans who are there. Seeing that this dispute is in great disservice to our Lord God and our own service, we order that you should remain in all good order and peace with the bishop. Instead of opposing him, you should aid him and favor him in everything he should ask." Once again, just my professional fucking YouTuber opinion, Diego de Landa spent his time in Spain kissing all the right asses. But angry 4-testicled men aside, the investigation de Landa faced in Spain did not soften his conduct, but rather seemed to have emboldened him for a new era of brutality. Most traditional historical scholarship argues that when Landa returned as the 2nd bishop of the province of Yucatan, he did so a broken man, beaten by his enemies and limited in his powers. Nothing could be further from the truth. Landa would go on during his tenure as bishop to prosecute more Maya for the crime of idolatry than he had done during his infamous 1562 auto de fe. The only difference was that now, as their bishop, he returned with the legal power to punish the Maya. Bishop Torral's work, limited as it was quickly undone, and De Landa continued his brutal discipline of the Maya. Until finally, Diego de Landa decided to show mercy to the Maya in 1579 by dying relatively young of an illness. He served as the bishop of the Yucatan for 6 years in total. And that brings us to the last chapter of this miserable moment in history. This might shock you, but I like getting really fucking drunk and reading Wikipedia. It's out of character, I know. This whole project started when I stumbled across Diego de Landa's page. This was sometime around fall 2023. So, I conceived of this video, I began to read his writings, and wow, they were just awful. The account was stilted, it was awkward, it changed between subject matter like almost randomly, it repeated itself. Most inexplicably, it switched between first and third person just constantly. It was a legitimately, mind-bogglingly unpleasant read. How the fuck is this account too long and too short at the same time? So I just moved on. I have to continue putting out videos pretty regularly if I want to avoid having to make rent behind a dumpster. I just didn't even know where to start with this shit. Obviously, I've not been working on this video nonstop since fall 2023. It's just constantly starting and stopping and starting and stopping. It's been horrible. There is a method to my madness, and I call it the madness method, registered trademark. So I center my video around some sort of primary source which I read, then I find a modern expert's dissection of that source, then I investigate any points which I found particularly interesting or which the modern expert, in my professional fucking YouTuber opinion, didn't really investigate or explain well. And that was yet another issue with Diego de Landa's account. I could not locate any long-form, investigative, modern writings on de Landa's book. I just put the project on the back burner, and I returned to my diligent research on how Starfield is fucking trash. I don't know how they fucked it up this bad, but I couldn't get it out of my head. And in February of 2023, I found to my delight that The Friar and the Maya had been published. Without the publication of this book, which was written by 4 subject matter experts, this video would not have happened. That's right, I blame them.
Among its 4 co-authors is Matthew Restall, head of Latin American Studies at Penn State University. I have a history with this motherfucker. The Friar and the Maya was exactly what I needed. A fresh translation of de Landa's account, annotated by 4 modern experts, and accompanied by a set of essays about the man and his writings written by those same authors. I was so excited to get this book. It was perfect. Finally, I could get into the mind of this madman.
Landa did not write the Relaccion or account. Copyists at a later date created the account from a larger manuscript, a recopilation, personal note collection, that long ago disappeared. Furthermore, as we shall detail in Chapter 6, much of both the account and its lost parent, the recopilation, comprised material copied or summarized from manuscripts and books written by others. Certainly, there are some personal observations in the account, but there's little of Landa himself in the text. His personal reactions or interactions are absent, or at best rare.
You can't keep getting away with that!
Diego de Landa did not write a book. He wrote a collection of personal notes and copied some notes from other sources. In fact, the text that we have today is not in de Landa's handwriting. Rather, it's a copy of his notes which was made in the decades after his death. Now, did these copyists edit de Landa's notes? Yeah, almost definitely. This is particularly horrible. On the cover... Fuck. Oh my god. Tropical storm, that scared the shit out of me. In fact, on this collection of copied notes is written on the cover, "Here's an account of the things of China." So that's concerning. Then, in the 19th century, this mangled collection of copied and edited notes was discovered by an eccentric French Mayanist. This is his name. I am not even going to try. It was then edited further. He added sections and chapters, giving it the appearance of a real book, which make no mistake, it is not. But if this is a copied version of de Landa's original notes, then where are the original notes? His entire collection of personal writings, which would undoubtedly give us an actual window into his mind. They burned. Now, this is all speculative, but these are, very accomplished authors with a great body of work behind them. They know what they're doing, and they say that the 2 most likely locations for the Friar's larger body of original notes was either the Royal Palace Library at El Escorial or the Royal Palace of Madrid, both of which burned down in 1671 and 1734, respectively. How much of Diego de Landa is in what we have today? Well, it depends on who you ask. Other sources that I read said that it was a perfect window into his mind, but I'm gonna have to agree with the 4 authors of this. It is scattershot, almost random. A portrait of the man, but an incomplete one. Certain things shine through. His anger at conquistador conduct, his inexplicable soft spot for Maya women and children, and indeed the fact that he did not like thick black baddies. We can ascertain that Diego de Landa probably would not have enjoyed Hood Hottest Princess by Sexy Red, but it's more difficult to understand other, arguably more important, aspects of his personality and worldview. When the sheer depth of flaws inherent in Diego de Landa's account reared their ugly head, I wanted to stop the project all over again. But it also made me feel an even deeper need to understand this fucking lunatic. Yes, the incomplete nature of the account means it's a bad source on Diego de Landa himself, but it is also a pretty bad fucking source on the Maya, too. Imagine if the most complete source we had on Roman culture, religion, and politics was an edited, copied, and incomplete series of notes written by a Martian who hated Romans. And it would be considered, in any other context, an absolutely horrible source that no one anywhere should use for anything at all. And yet, as pointed out in the Friar of the Maya, it really does capture a moment. Not necessarily July 12th, 1562, but the colonial Yucatan. It is broken, it is flawed, it is revised, its true nature is masked over and over and over, and that is the most representative thing I think imaginable. Diego de Landa tortured thousands of people, killing dozens, chasing shadows. When pressed for evidence of anything truly significant, actual human sacrifice, he could produce nothing but incredibly dubious testimonies. Testimonies that, Alejandro Enriquez argues, are only taken seriously because of this edited collection of notes written by a cruel madman who knew how to control a fucking narrative. Problematic as the Sotuta confessions are, and the fact that they were obtained under torture is but one concern, scholars still often corroborate their veracity by underscoring their similarities, ignoring their hyperbole and inconsistencies, and cross-checking them against other, primarily Spanish sources. Dennis Tedlock argues that some scholars accept Landa's evidence because it corroborates what we already knew about the Maya from other sources, failing to recognize that the principal other source about Maya culture is Landa's own, Relaccion de las cosas de Yucatan. But, thankfully I could still do this fucking video, because I'm not the first guy to be obsessed with the mind of Diego de Landa. While Diego de Landa's book is not a complete window into his mind, numerous writings from his contemporaries, both Maya and Spanish, absolutely shine a light onto the man. There's one specific event, recorded decades after his death, which, if true, makes it all click into place. His chief Franciscan biographer, López de Cogolludo, writing a century later, believed Landa to have traveled all over the peninsula, save to remote Bacalar, in the decade before his Inquisition. Cogolludo records that in 1551, while passing through the territory of the Cupoles, Landa came upon 300 Indians about to sacrifice a youth. The boy, garlanded with flowers, was tied to a post, and around him were arrayed vessels of balchi, the honey-based mead favored by the old gods. Landa, bursting from the thickets, released the boy, smashed the vessels, and preached to the Indians so persuasively, we are told, that they begged him to stay among them and teach them further. And to show their good faith, they themselves smashed the idols in his presence. Before we get into this, I need to be very clear. I really want to believe that this is true, and we should always be very careful with the things we want to believe. Aliens are real, and they're horny. I want to believe it for a very simple reason, one you can probably assume. It makes the monster human. He makes sense with this piece. If this happened, I get it. How would he have felt in this temporary triumph, saving a young boy, moving an audience of hostile strangers to smash the demonic idols they worshipped? If this happened, it was absolutely the greatest moment of Diego de Landa's life. He went to the other side of the world to do exactly this. Cogolludo's biography would detail further mass conversions around this time, where de Landa moved countless Maya to the Christian faith. What if Diego de Landa wrote about this moment, which may have changed the course of his life forever? A moment that makes him human, and it was burned. According to the written evidence currently available, Cogolludo was the last person to use Landa's vanished magnum opus of personal notes, as writers in Yucatan made no further references to the manuscript. I don't know how Diego de Landa slept at night. I emailed Matthew Restall. I asked him, and he informed me, after he told me that Santa Claus wasn't real, that he wagered that Diego de Landa slept like a baby. I do not agree. These are not the actions of a man who sleeps well. But what troubled him in the night was not what he did. What troubled him is the same thing which has troubled me and countless others. Why he did it. He undoubtedly loved the Maya, in his fucked up, horrible way. That is on full display in his account. When people think of the Maya, they focus on their cruelties, right? They fixate on the image of a priest covered in scars and tattoos and piercings, holding a still beating heart into the sky. A ritual that, ironically, they learned from Central Mexico long after the Classic period. You would think that, if any man were to communicate that sort of image, it would be Diego de Landa, and there are significant portions of his so-called account which fixate on alien and cruel rituals. But there is an also inexplicable tenderness to sections of it, a genuine affection for the people that he believed he was saving. This people had a great and excessive fear of death, and they showed this by the fact that all the services that they performed for their gods were for no other purpose nor for any other thing, except they should give them health, life, and sustenance. But when it came time to die, it was indeed a thing to see the sorrow and the cries that they made for their dead, and the great grief it caused them. During the day they wept for them in silence, and at night with loud and very sad cries. What a shame it was to hear them. You know, if you really do want to get to the heart of Diego de Landa,
You can find it in the middle of this miserable collection of copied notes, when the so-called account suddenly and inexplicably shifts into prayer.
it explains his fury, his frustration, and why he punished the Maya so severely for never becoming what he needed them to be, his very purpose for being. I don't know how Diego de Landa slept at night, but I know why he got up in the morning. O Lord, my God, the light, being, and life of my soul, holy guide and true path of my habits, consolation of my afflictions, inner joy of my sorrows, refreshment and rest from my labors. Why do you command me, Lord, to do what is better called work than rest? Why do you oblige me to do that which I cannot complete? I know how much of a pussy this makes me, but sometimes these more depressing moments in history, because I have to, obviously I get really into this shit, and I read as much as I can about it, so you sort of immerse yourself in something, it starts to bother you a little. As I'm sure you've gathered from my years worth of weepy video essays, I am a very sensitive man. I think that being such a Kurt Vonnegut fanboy has helped me laugh through that, you know. Finishing this project, I found a lot of comfort in the words of a Mesoamerican intellectual who currently decorates the Mexican 100 peso note. I found a lot of comfort in a flower song written by the Hungry Coyote, the warrior, poet, outlaw, philosopher, and king, Netzahualcoyotl. This is an excerpt from his flower song called All the Earth is a Grave, and Nothing Escapes It. Thanks for watching.
Filled are the bowels of the earth, with pestilential dust once flesh and bone. Once animate bodies of man who sat upon thrones, decided cases, presided in council, commanded armies, conquered provinces, possessed treasure, destroyed temples, exulted in their pride, majesty, fortune, praise, and power. Vanished are these glories, just as the fearful smoke vanishes that belches forth from the infernal fires of Popocatépetl. Nothing recalls them but the painted page.